Hi everyone, my name is Jaakko. This is joint work with Sean Parent from Adobe Systems. And this may look like a user interface talk a little bit. I guess it is a bit of a user interface talk as well, but fundamentally I think it's about programming. So multi-selection, what is that? We know this, so we select files or cells in a spreadsheet or email or photographs or text and the reason is that we want to perform some action to many elements instead of just selecting one element and then performing an action and repeating that 100 times. We select 100 elements and do it just once. So, or something more complex. We draw a lasso around and everything that's touched will be selected and so forth. And we know roughly how this works. To select an element, we click. That clears all the previous selections if there are any, set some kind of an anchor so that we can shift click and select more elements from that anchor up to some point, or command click allows us to toggle and set another anchor or new anchor, or with dragging we get the same behavior as with shift click or something like that, select an area. Sometimes there's some key bindings that we can use to move around and select more things. So this is kind of like a typical user interface guidance that is given to user, but we sort of use it anyway. So has been with us for a long time. What's really the issue? There was some guidelines set back in the day, and it seems to me and to us that it's really the conformance to these guidelines, if it ever existed, has just deteriorated over the years. So in many times, multi-selection, where it should be present, is not. Where it should be consistent, then we should work the same way everywhere. It's kind of our standard vocabulary of interacting with GUIs. It's inconsistent, it's often incomplete, it's often wrong, or broken. Broken I mean buggy, and wrong I mean it's just ill-advised, bad design choices. So missing, okay, so I can go to Finder and select many elements, but if I happen to take that flyout window from the dock, suddenly there's no multi-selection. I don't know why, or probably because no one bothered to implement it, or maybe it's just a deliberate design decision, but that I don't know why that would be. Or browser, I have many browser tabs open at any particular time. It would be nice to be able to multi-select those and drag some to another window, but that's not supported anywhere that I know of. I can select email messages, but in some clients at least, I can't select folders, multi-select folders. And tablet, the situation is usually pretty bad. It's, I guess, improving, but there are many cases where multi-selection really would be needed, but it's just not supported. So ideally, any place in a GUI where there is a collection of some kind should support multi-selection. Why not? Okay. Apple's Numbers, for instance, has a pretty reasonably good multi-selection capability. But if you go the cloud version of the same app, behavior is completely different. If you use Finder and select from this list view, you change the view to this 2D view, multi-selection semantics changes drastically. Some of it comes because the view is different, but some is just arbitrary differences. Or you're in Gmail and you use multi-selection to select your emails, and has one semantics. Then you put attachments to your compose another email. You get a completely different multi-selection semantics from the OS. Okay. It's incomplete in many cases. Oftentimes keyboard selection is not there. Multi-deselection is very rarely present. There's often something like multi-toggling, which is rather, I don't really know how that is a justified feature. What's never there is undo. I don't know of any application that has selection undo, yet we really would like that. I'm sure we've all been here. You select the many images, for instance, in a photo editor and a photo organizer, and plan to just send something, drag them into a folder or somewhere, but we just misclick and it's gone, and no way of getting that back. Or then it's just broken. This is from an Android photo app, so you do selections and that way look at what's happening down there. Okay. Or in Gmail, let's delete some email. From here, I'll select something, I'm gonna delete, not the first one though. So I'll go back and I'll delete all of these, and now I'm gonna go back to delete them, but look at the first one, oh, it's selected again. So how did that happen? I understand there's a good implementation explanation, but to the user, you can't really explain this. Or Finder, okay, let's do a click, then do like a shift click somewhere, and then not this one, and then I'd like to do another shift click. I don't know what that should do, but look at the last one. What happened with that one? Makes no sense. Okay, another command click. Let's do shift click to extend, shift click to extend, shift click to extend. Let's do another shift click to extend. Whoops, why was that? What happened? It's not even idempotent, like shift clicking, you would kind of think. And of course, if you drag, you get a completely different behavior. You get this multi-toggling and weird thing. So it's puzzling, right? So how can it be that the feature that has about 1 billion users every day has been there for decades, and it's like this? Okay, so I think the reason is because this user guide to multi-selection is also the programmer specification to multi-selection. So, okay, we all think we know what it means, but then there's so many corner cases. What happens if I click and it's already selected, and how should the keyboard things work, and select from here to there? What do those mean? What's the notion of here? What's the notion of there? When a programmer programs multi-selection, there's usually two choices. So you pick something that already has multi-selection, like a widget of a kind, a list box or something. Then you get that multi-select behavior, and it's easy, but it's usually broken. Or if you can't fit your thing that you're building into a widget, you can't reuse the widget, then what you're going to do is use some of these GUI frameworks, selectable views or something, and build another. They give you some tools to build a selection, but it really is a kind of a glorified bitch vector. They talk about there's notions of a cursor or an active end and an anchor and things like that, and a lot of functions to manipulate those, but nothing really that tells you how you should be manipulating them. And there are some really, I'm not going to go into that, but misguided sort of design decisions as well. So there's no spec and no reusable implementations. What we have and can observe is that there's a lot of these artifacts of implementation. The feature works in a ways that just happens to fall out the particular design decisions that the developers made. Okay, so what's our contribution here? We have an abstract model of precise and abstract model of multi-selection. We'd like to think of the multi-selection language or multi-selection semantics of multi-selection, so that then maps directly to a reusable implementation that gives us the canonical good multi-selection feature that we think, I at least thought 15 minutes ago, that all applications provide, but really do not. It drastically changes the programmer's experience. So first of all, the model is independent of any widgets, any frameworks, independent of the shape and arrangements of the elements or the shape of the selection tool that we're using. Okay. So some concepts to understand the model. We know about the anchor and the cursor or the active end. So typically you think of you select from somewhere to somewhere, but we generalize it into a bunch of points. So when you shift click multiple times, you're specifying many points with a mouse or finger or such. Or when you drag, there's multiple points being selected. So we think of it, instead of just an anchor and the active end, the programmer or the user specifies somehow a path of points, and we call it the selection path. That selection path somehow determines a bunch of elements, which we call the selection domain. And you'll see this sdom function used in the slides to come. That is the one that does the mapping from selection paths to selection domains. And this is dependent. This is of course application dependent, context dependent. This is most of the stuff that the programmer has to provide to get a full selection feature implemented. So most of the context specific feature is captured there. Okay, we need some way to modify selections. So the smallest unit that we are using to change selections is what we call the primitive selection operator or operation. So first, how do we represent selections? Well, we can just think of them as functions that map from some, doesn't really matter what the elements are, but some index family I, and it maps to true or false whether that element is selected or not, or an index is selected or not. When we change that, let's think functionally. So a change to a selection just maps these functions into another, gives a new function of that type. Okay, so when we want to perform a change to a selection, there's some selection domain, some elements that we want to touch, right? Either select or deselect or toggle or do something like that. So it's some subset of I. And then what do we do to those? It's going to be selecting or deselecting typically. So we call it a selection function. It's just from booleans to booleans, and the four possible functions are these constant function true or false, or toggling, or just identity function. And with these, we can provide the smallest unit of changing the selection, which just says this primitive selection operation is determined by this function f and by function j, and we apply f to the current selection state of the element if it's in j, and if it's not, we leave it the way it was. Okay. So now all changes to selections are going to be just sequences of these operations, which conveniently enough, their joint effect to a selection is just a composition of these functions. And if you remember where those selection domains came from, those J1 to Jn, well, they come from these utterances that the users do with their mouse or finger or so forth by selections describing these selection paths. So the sdom function is there to compute the paths into those functions. So these f functions are determined on whether you use shift or command or so forth, and these j's are based on the paths that the points really are. Okay. There's a little bit more on the selection state in the program, so that's represented as a tuple that we store everything necessary to operate on the selections. So S is our selection mapping. You can think of this kind of a non-undoable constant selection space. Op is this composition of these selection operators. So at any time, if you want to ask what's the selection state of an ith element, we apply op to S to first get the current selection state, and then we get the selection the state of the element I. P is the current selection path, and the lowercase p is the keyboard cursor, which is often happens to be the last element of the selection path, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, so with this we can get the semantics of multi-selection, and this is almost everything. And I mean, these are the operations that are meant for users to use to modify the selection state. So we name them to click, shift click, command click, just to be consistent with the kind of expected behavior of these sort of established behavior. It's really not precisely defined anywhere, but and then arrow keys, the same thing, shift and command arrow and space. All of these are functions that map the selection state tuple to another selection state tuple. These click functions take an additional parameter that we mark a little differently, so it's a point that has been clicked. And let's see what's happening. So, well, I guess first, so these are I'm pointing out the application-specific parts or the context-specific parts. So these are parameters to the model. It's the SDOM function that we already saw. The vertical bar is really just append a new point to the selection path, but we make it changeable. There's some situations where it makes sense to parameterize. Keyboard, to define what keyboard operations mean, the only thing that is needed is to tell what it means to move left, or what it means to move right, or up or down. Okay. There's a few more little things, but I'm just not mentioning them here now. So if we think of what's happening with click, well, we know what the behavior is. Clear the current selection and select the currently clicked elements. So how do we express that? The rightmost of those two primitive selection operations, the selection function is constant function f, so it's deselecting, and it's deselecting all the elements currently selected. So we push that into our function composition. And then the selection, we take the singleton path. It's a little complicated way of saying just the one element path B, because it might in some cases not be, but usually it's the one element path P, and compute the selection domain from that and select those elements. The other two in shift, when we do clicking, we don't care about what the previous cursor position was or previous path was. We throw that away, and so we store those as well. Another little complicated way of setting just is the active end of the active end of that path is going to be the cursor, keyboard cursor. Similarly, when we do when command click, we always put two elements at two primitive selection operations at a time as a technicality to make this expressions a little shorter. So that's why command click pushes the no op first, and then it figures out whether something has been selected or not, and uses constant function true or false based on that, and then just selects the element that has been clicked. Shift click, the only thing that changes in shift click is the current the current selection domain. And how do we get a new selection domain? We push a new element to the selection path, compute a new selection domain, and use that as a current selection domain. And the selection function stays the same. Shift click needs another case where if nothing has been selected yet, it's just for that. The space, one could use other key bindings, but these are really just whatever keyboard bindings are chosen. You just they're defined in terms of the quick operations. You just use the keyboard selection there, like the PS as to use that. Okay. I guess I wanted to say one thing. Let me go back this much. So arrow the same way. The only thing that changes is just the position of the keyboard cursor, and then shift and command arrow are just compositions of these arrow movements and space. There's nothing for mouse movements because that's the same thing as shift click, right? When you drag your mouse. Okay. So now this can be directly implemented. Oh, let me say undo. Undo becomes just you drop two things of this composition, and that's it. The lab is available, and like I said, what happens with the programmer experience, it changes dramatically. What you need to do, and to get the multi-selection working, you have to, of course, implement some visualization functions, the visualizer mapping. You implement a selection geometry class, which is essentially the SDOM function, and then you just map the keyboard and mouse events to those things. So here's a rectangular selection geometry class. It has the selection, so just select everything within a rectangle. The selection domain is the SDOM function. It takes a path, computes the J. It has this bar and step functions that don't do anything here, And then a couple of more things that I'll just maybe not mention now. Here's another selection geometry. This is like a list box selection geometry, selection domain, extend path. Now step does something because it does the keyboard things. Okay, so these are the things that need to be defined to get some working selection, and then bind keyboard bindings. And now what happens here? This is like mouse event, mouse down handler. You take the click point, and you take the click point, and then you just call these functions. That's it. The same with mouse move. Nothing else needs to be done. Here's some keyboard events. The same thing. You just figure out what are the keys that were being pressed, and you call those functions. You get a fully functional multi-selection feature. Okay. So I have 30-second mouse. Do I have time? None. Oh, okay. I'll show you just to you can't see much here. I have just a selectable thing. I'm just saying this is a full-fledged GUI multi-selection feature that allows I can change sort of different kinds of selection tools on the fly, and they can be pretty complicated as well. There's no issue there. And of course, if I happen to do this horrendous thing and I want my selection back, it comes with undo. So that was it back here. Thank you. I guess, yeah, my thoughts are really, I don't know what to think of the thing. So there's this thing that really has been broken for a long time, and I think we have now fixed it. It takes a while to get adopted, but what was needed was this sort of, I think, programming language perspective and some formal thinking. Yes.
Thanks. Now that you've figured out how it should work on old-fashioned computers, how should it work on new computers like this?
So, the same way. We have, since writing this paper, we've implemented the same thing on Android and on a tablet, and basically the same selection model, the same abstract model works well. We've actually conducted some user studies as well, and with taking what's like currently on. There's really, I mean, it's the same selection behavior that we think, like I said, and we think that works anywhere. So we're not really providing anything new user-wise, but it just works nicely. There's a couple of things that make selection really work much better. One is some key things that often people get wrong. One is that shift click and dragging is unified. What that allows you to do, what do you do typically when you want to select on a device like that doesn't fit a lot of things on one screen? So you start maybe dragging, and then, okay, now you have to push the edge to get more elements, right? Oh, now you went too far, then you push on the other side, and you have to try to be careful not to let go. But if you have shift click, you drag, oh, I have to go further, you just let go and you scroll however you want, and then you pick it back.
What is shift click?
Shift click, okay. Yes, we have things that, on tablet, you don't really, with a finger, you don't need like a regular click. So you have, we use a double click for shift click, actually. So, and to start a drag, you do a tap and then start from that. There's another. The other thing that often is also what people always also get wrong is that your shift click or dragging kills the elements underneath. Then if you combine that with overshooting your selection, and then you come back, then already what you had there is already gone. So there's small things that you get right that helps the user experience. Oh, wait. There was one more. Yeah, we can take it offline.